A quiet cashier living a peaceful life in a small-town market hides a dark past. But when a ruthless gang threatens his new world, his buried secrets resurface, and he's forced to confront them in ways no one could have expected. What will happen when his past finally catches up to him? Miguel adjusted his apron, his hands moving with practiced ease as he scanned another item. The beeping of the register blended seamlessly with the lively chatter filling the small market. Clara's market wasn't just a store, it was the heartbeat of the neighborhood, a place where people exchanged smiles, gossip, and the occasional complaint about the weather. Miguel appreciated this rhythm, the predictability of his work, and the anonymity it provided. Clara, the market's spirited owner, bustled past him, her arms laden with fresh produce. "Miguel, can you check the stock in aisle 3 when you're free? I think we're running low on rice again." He nodded, offering her a polite smile. "Of course, Clara." Despite the familiarity of their exchanges, Miguel maintained a distance. He respected Clara and her husband, Jose, but he wasn't one for deep connections. Jose, always quick with a joke, would often try to pull Miguel into conversations, but Miguel had perfected the art of polite disengagement. "Hey, Miguel," Jose called from the butcher's counter, waving a slab of meat in his hand. "You're too quiet, my friend. One day I'll get you to laugh." Miguel gave a small chuckle, more out of obligation than amusement. He liked Jose's good-natured teasing, but he preferred to keep to himself. His life here was simple and undemanding, exactly what he wanted. The market was alive with its usual crowd, mothers comparing prices, children darting between aisles, and elderly patrons sharing stories of the past. Miguel moved through the day as a silent observer, blending into the background. It was a skill he had honed over years, one that kept questions at bay and his past securely hidden. As the afternoon sun streamed through the glass storefront, Clara approached Miguel with a steaming cup of coffee. "You work too hard. Take a break." "Thank you," he said, accepting the cup. He sipped it slowly, letting the warmth seep into him. Moments like these were rare but appreciated, a quiet reminder of the community he was now part of, even if only on the fringes. Miguel watched as Clara greeted a customer with her characteristic warmth. She was the glue that held this place together, her kindness a stark contrast to the harsher realities he had once known. He admired her resilience, though he would never say it aloud. The day wound down with the sun dipping below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the market. Miguel locked up the register, his movements deliberate and measured. As he stepped outside, the cool evening air greeted him. The streetlights flickered on, illuminating the path back to his small apartment. For Miguel, this life was enough. No drama, no complications, just the steady hum of daily routines. He didn't need more than this, or so he thought. The next morning, the market was buzzing as usual. Customers shuffled in and out, their voices mingling with the sound of carts and cash registers. Miguel was at his station, methodically scanning items, when the atmosphere shifted. The chatter hushed, replaced by a tense silence. Miguel glanced up and immediately understood why. Ramiro, a hulking man with a permanent scowl, strode into the market with his entourage of rough-looking men. Their presence was an intrusion, a jarring reminder of a world far removed from the market's warmth. Ramiro's eyes swept over the place with cold detachment, landing on Clara, who was arranging fruit near the entrance. "Clara," Ramiro drawled, his voice deceptively smooth. "We need to talk." Clara straightened, her face a mix of resolve and apprehension. "I don't have time for your games, Ramiro. This is a place of business." Ramiro chuckled, a sound that carried no humor. "Business, yes. That's exactly why I'm here. You see, places like this need protection. For a small fee, I can ensure nothing bad happens here. Accidents, can be so unpredictable." Miguel's hands froze mid-motion, his instincts telling him to stay out of it. He wasn't here to get involved, he reminded himself. But Jose, standing nearby, wasn't so restrained. "You call this protection?" Jose spat, stepping forward. "We don't need anything from you." Ramiro's smile vanished. His men moved closer, their postures threatening. "Careful, amigo. Big words can lead to big trouble." Miguel watched, his heart pounding. Jose's defiance was admirable but reckless. The tension was palpable, the market's usual vibrancy replaced by an uneasy stillness. Miguel knew he should remain an observer, but something about Ramiro's arrogance stirred a familiar feeling deep within him, a quiet storm he worked hard to suppress. "Jose," Clara said sharply, her voice trembling. "That's enough." Ramiro stepped closer to Clara, his tone softening in a way that was somehow more menacing. Think about it, Clara. It'd be a shame if something happened to this lovely place. Before he could continue, Miguel spoke, his voice calm but firm. She's already given you her answer. All eyes turned to him. Ramiro's expression darkened as he sized up Miguel. And who are you supposed to be? Just someone who works here, Miguel replied evenly, meeting Ramiro's gaze. But maybe you should leave before things escalate. A murmur rippled through the market. Ramiro studied Miguel for a moment before smirking. Interesting. I'll be back, Clara. You should think it over. With that, he turned and sauntered out, his men following close behind. The tension lingered, the customers looking to Clara for reassurance. Everyone, it's fine, Clara said, forcing a smile. Let's get back to business. But Miguel knew it wasn't fine. As he returned to his station, he felt Clara's eyes on him, her expression unreadable. Jose muttered something about calling the police, but Miguel doubted it would help. Ramiro wasn't just a bully, he was dangerous. And Miguel wasn't sure he could keep avoiding the storm brewing on the horizon. The market seemed quieter in the days following Ramiro's visit. Customers whispered to one another, casting nervous glances toward the entrance, as if expecting trouble to walk in again. Miguel went about his work as usual, but he could feel the unease hanging over everyone like a heavy cloud. Clara approached him one afternoon while he was restocking shelves. Her usual warmth was replaced by a quiet tension. Miguel, she began, hesitating. I appreciate what you did the other day, but you don't have to get involved. He straightened, meeting her gaze. I wasn't trying to get involved. I just thought someone needed to say something. She studied him for a moment before nodding. Jose thinks we should call the police, but you saw how Ramiro operates. People like him don't scare easily. Miguel nodded in agreement but said nothing. He understood Ramiro's type all too well. They thrived on fear and control, and calling the police might only make things worse. But he couldn't explain this to Clara without revealing more than he was willing to share. Later that evening, Miguel overheard a conversation between two regulars near the produce section. Their voices were low, but the words carried weight. Did you hear about Miguel? Someone said he used to be, involved in some bad stuff. Really? He doesn't seem the type. Miguel's chest tightened. The whispers were inevitable, he supposed. People always speculated about the quiet ones, but if Ramiro caught wind of these rumors, things could escalate quickly. That night, as Miguel walked home, he replayed the events of the past week in his mind. He had left his old life behind, or so he thought. The shadows of his past were long, and it seemed they were creeping up on him again. The following day, Miguel found Clara in her small office, her head buried in paperwork. He knocked lightly on the door frame, and she looked up, surprised. Clara, we need to talk, he said, stepping inside. About Ramiro. She set down her pen, her expression cautious. What about him? Don't pay him, Miguel said firmly. Once you start, he'll never stop. People like that only take more and more. Clara frowned. And what do you suggest we do instead? Fight him? He has people, Miguel. People who could hurt us. Miguel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I've dealt with situations like this before. Sometimes you have to stand your ground. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. Dealt with situations like this? What do you mean? Miguel looked away, the weight of her question pressing down on him. I just know what happens when you give in to threats. Trust me. Her expression softened, but her concern was evident. Miguel, if there's something I need to know, there isn't, he interrupted gently. Just trust me. She nodded reluctantly, though doubt lingered in her eyes. As Miguel left the office, he wondered how much longer he could keep his secrets hidden. Ramiro was a problem, but the whispers and Clara's questions were another. He had built a peaceful life here, but the cracks in his facade were beginning to show, and he wasn't sure how long he could hold everything together. The morning started like any other. Miguel arrived early, unlocking the doors and preparing the market for the day. The familiar routine was soothing, a small refuge from the tension brewing beneath the surface. Clara and Jose joined shortly after, their faces strained, but determined to carry on as usual. By mid-morning, the market was bustling again. Customers moved through the aisles, filling their baskets and exchanging pleasantries. Miguel kept his head down, focusing on his work, but a sense of unease lingered. Something felt off. The sound of heavy footsteps shattered the calm. Ramiro and his men barged into the market, their presence like a thunderclap. The air seemed to thicken, and a hush fell over the customers as they quickly moved aside. Ramiro strode to the center of the store, his men spreading out like a pack of wolves. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady but edged with fear. "Ramiro, you need to leave." Ramiro chuckled, a deep menacing sound. "I don't think you understand, Clara. I don't take no for an answer." With a nod from Ramiro, his men began knocking items off shelves, scattering goods across the floor. Customers gasped, some fleeing while others watched in stunned silence. Jose, standing near the butcher's counter, clenched his fists. "Stop!" Jose shouted, stepping forward. "You can't do this!" One of Ramiro's men turned, sneering. "And what are you going to do about it, old man?" Before Clara could intervene, Jose lunged at the man. The clash was swift and brutal. Jose swung wildly, but the thug was faster, sidestepping his attack and delivering a sharp blow to his ribs. Jose crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. Miguel had been frozen, observing the chaos with a mix of anger and restraint. But as Jose fell, something inside him snapped. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, his movements deliberate and precise. "Enough," Miguel said, his voice cutting through the commotion like a blade. Ramiro turned to him, eyebrows raised in mock amusement. "And here I thought you were just the quiet cashier." Miguel ignored him, focusing on the man standing over Jose. In a blur of motion, he grabbed the thug's arm, twisting it with practiced efficiency. The man cried out, dropping to his knees. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Miguel as he stood over the defeated thug, his posture calm but unyielding. Ramiro's smirk faltered, replaced by a wary glare. "You've made your point," Ramiro said, his tone colder now. "But this isn't over." With a sharp gesture, he signaled his men to leave. They retreated, their footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Miguel knelt to help Jose, who winced as he tried to sit up. "Are you okay?" Miguel asked quietly. Jose nodded, his face pale but determined. "Yeah, thanks to you." Clara approached, her expression a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Miguel, where did you learn to do that?" Miguel avoided her gaze, helping Jose to his feet. "We can talk later. Right now, we need to clean up." As they began to restore order to the market, Miguel felt the weight of Clara's eyes on him. He had revealed more of himself than he intended, and there was no going back. The fragile peace he had built was unraveling, and he knew Ramiro wouldn't let this stand. The storm was far from over. The market was quieter the next day, its usual buzz subdued. Customers trickled in cautiously, their voices hushed as they surveyed the aftermath of the previous day's chaos. The damage had been cleaned up, but the tension remained, a shadow hanging over the once lively space. Miguel kept himself busy, avoiding questions and sidestepping Clara's glances. He knew she wanted answers, but he wasn't ready to give them. Not yet. The air felt heavy with unspoken words, and Miguel could sense that it was only a matter of time before things escalated again. By mid-afternoon, the tension broke. Ramiro's voice rang out as he entered the market, his steps slow and deliberate. His men followed, their faces hard with determination. Ramiro carried a folder in his hand, the edges worn as though it had been handled many times. "Miguel," he called, his voice dripping with venom. "You've been quite the surprise. I thought you were just another nobody." Miguel turned, his expression unreadable. "I'm just someone trying to work. What do you want?" Ramiro smirked, waving the folder in the air. "I've been asking around, and it turns out you're not as invisible as you think. You've made enemies, my friend, and some of them are very eager to know where you've been hiding." Miguel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Ramiro stepped closer, his tone mocking. "See, I could take this little file to the authorities, or maybe to some less forgiving people. I'm sure they'd love to have a chat with you." Clara, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "Leave him alone, Ramiro. Haven't you caused enough trouble?" Ramiro turned to her, his expression turning cold. "This isn't about you, Clara. This is about him." He jabbed a finger toward Miguel. "Your quiet little cashier isn't who he pretends to be." Miguel took a step forward, his voice steady but low. "If you have a problem with me, leave them out of it. This has nothing to do with Clara or the market." "Oh, but it does," Ramiro said, his grin returning. "You've made it about them by playing the hero. So here's the deal, Miguel. You work for me now. Otherwise, I let everyone know exactly who you are. And trust me, it won't end well." The room was silent. Clara and Jose looked at Miguel, their faces a mix of confusion and worry. Miguel's mind raced, weighing his options. He had spent years running, avoiding conflict. But now it was clear that his past wouldn't stay buried. "I'll think about it," Miguel said finally, his voice calm despite the storm brewing inside him. Ramiro laughed, the sound sharp and grating. "You do that, but don't take too long. I'm not a patient man." With that, Ramiro turned and left, his men trailing behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara approached Miguel, her voice trembling. "What is he talking about, Miguel? What's going on?" Miguel looked at her, his eyes heavy with unspoken truths. "It's complicated, Clara. I'll explain when the time is right." She frowned but nodded, sensing that pressing him now wouldn't yield answers. Miguel watched her walk away, the weight of her trust pressing down on him. He had to make a choice, fight back, or let Ramiro destroy everything he had built. Miguel clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He wasn't ready to run again, not this time. The market felt colder than usual that morning, the air thick with unease. Miguel moved through his tasks in silence, his mind heavy with Ramiro's threats. He knew the man wasn't bluffing. Whatever information Ramiro had uncovered was dangerous, and Miguel couldn't afford to let it surface. As he restocked shelves near the back of the store, he noticed something strange. A coworker, a wiry man named Luis who rarely spoke more than necessary, was lingering near the cash register. Luis glanced around nervously before slipping a small envelope into his pocket. Miguel's instincts flared. Something wasn't right. Deciding not to confront him immediately, Miguel kept an eye on Luis for the rest of the day. When their shifts ended, he followed him out of the market, staying far enough back to remain unnoticed. Luis walked quickly, his movements erratic, until he turned into a narrow alley. Miguel waited a moment before stepping into the alley. Luis froze when he saw him, his eyes wide with guilt. "Miguel," Luis stammered, his voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" "I was about to ask you the same thing," Miguel replied, his tone calm but firm. "What's in the envelope?" Luis took a step back, his hands trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Luis," Miguel said, his voice dropping. "Who are you working for? Ramiro?" Luis hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I didn't have a choice, Miguel. He threatened my family. He said if I didn't give him information about you, he'd come after them." Miguel's stomach churned, a mix of anger and disappointment. "What did you tell him?" "Just little things," Luis admitted. "How long you've been working here, how you keep to yourself, stuff like that. I swear I didn't know it was serious until he started asking about your past." Miguel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Luis had betrayed him, but the fear in his eyes was genuine. Ramiro had used the man's vulnerability as a weapon, just as Miguel had feared he would. "Get out of here, Luis," Miguel said finally, his voice steady. "And don't give him anything else. If he comes back, tell me." Luis nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Miguel. I'm sorry." Miguel watched him disappear down the alley, his anger simmering. He had been trying to live a quiet, honest life, but it seemed the world wouldn't let him escape his past. That evening, Miguel stayed behind after closing. Clara found him sitting in the office, his head in his hands. "Miguel," she said softly, stepping inside. "Are you okay?" He looked up at her, the weight of the day etched into his face. "There's something I need to tell you." Clara closed the door, pulling a chair closer. "I'm listening." Miguel hesitated, the words sticking in his throat, but he knew she deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "I wasn't always this person, the one you know. I used to be involved in things I'm not proud of, dangerous things." Clara's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and worry. "What kind of things?" "Let's just say I've seen people like Ramiro before," Miguel said, his voice heavy. "I know how they operate because I used to be one of them." Clara's eyes widened, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I left that life behind a long time ago," Miguel went on. "I wanted to start fresh, to live simply. But Ramiro found out something about me, something that could ruin everything I've built here." Clara was silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Miguel, I don't know everything you've been through, but I know the person you are now, and I trust you." Her words struck a chord, and Miguel felt a flicker of hope. But he also knew that trust came with a responsibility. If he was going to protect Clara, Jose, and the market, he had to confront Ramiro and his own past head-on. Miguel sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the glow of a single desk lamp illuminating the papers spread before him. They were notes he had made, observations of Ramiro and his men over the past few days. He studied them intently, piecing together a plan. If he was going to stop Ramiro, he needed to outthink him, not just outfight him. The next morning, Miguel approached Jose, who was still recovering but eager to help. "I need your assistance," Miguel said, his tone serious. "You know the neighborhood better than anyone. I need to understand where Ramiro and his men operate." Jose's eyes lit up with determination. Anything to get that scum out of here. Together, they mapped out key locations, bars, alleys, and warehouses, where Ramiro's gang was known to linger. Miguel listened carefully, absorbing every detail. He was constructing a trap, one that would exploit their overconfidence and their tendency to underestimate him. By evening, Miguel called Clara into the office. "I have a plan," he said, his voice steady, "but I'll need your help keeping things calm here. The market needs to stay open as usual. No one can suspect anything." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I trust you, Miguel. Just be careful." Miguel spent the night preparing. He used his knowledge of Ramiro's tactics to devise a strategy that minimized risk to others while forcing a confrontation on his terms. He wasn't just defending the market anymore, he was sending a message. By the time the sun rose, Miguel was ready. The quiet man everyone thought they knew was gone. In his place stood someone determined, methodical, and unafraid to face the shadows of his past. The day began like any other, with the market bustling as customers came and went. Miguel moved through the aisles, outwardly calm but mentally rehearsing every step of his plan. He had spread word through discreet channels, ensuring Ramiro would hear of an opportunity too tempting to ignore. A delivery of cash arriving at the market, unprotected and ripe for the taking. By mid-afternoon, the trap was set. Ramiro arrived as expected, his men fanning out across the market. Their confidence was evident in their swagger, their sneers directed at the staff and customers. Ramiro sauntered toward Miguel, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "Miguel, my friend, I hear you've been keeping secrets from me." Miguel stood his ground, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about, Ramiro." "Oh, I think you do." Ramiro's grin widened, but it faltered as he noticed the subtle shifts in the room. The usual chatter had quieted, and the staff was conspicuously absent from their usual posts. Even the customers seemed to have melted away, leaving the market eerily empty. Miguel took a step closer, his voice low and firm. "You made a mistake coming here today." Ramiro chuckled, but unease flickered in his eyes. "You think you scare me, Miguel?" "No," Miguel said, his tone calm. "But you should be scared of your own arrogance." On cue, Jose emerged from the back, flanked by a few trusted friends from the neighborhood. They weren't armed, but their presence was enough to unsettle Ramiro's men, who shifted uncomfortably. Before Ramiro could react, Miguel made his move. He had positioned shelves and displays strategically, creating choke points that funneled Ramiro's men into vulnerable spots. Using his knowledge of the market's layout, Miguel quickly disarmed one of the thugs who lunged at him, redirecting the chaos with precision. Ramiro barked orders, his bravado slipping as Miguel dismantled his gang's aggression without excessive violence. The thugs, unused to such calculated resistance, began to falter, their unity unraveling. Finally, Miguel stood before Ramiro, his expression steely. "This ends now. You leave Clara, the market, and this neighborhood alone. If I see you here again, you won't get a second chance." Ramiro's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists, but he could see the writing on the wall. His men were retreating, and the support he relied on was nowhere to be found. After a tense moment, he sneered. "You've made an enemy today, Miguel." Miguel didn't flinch. "I've had worse." With a final glare, Ramiro turned and stormed out, his men following reluctantly. As the doors closed behind them, a collective sigh of relief swept through the market. Clara approached Miguel, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You did it," she said softly. Miguel nodded, though his expression remained serious. "For now, but it's not over." The market began to return to life as customers trickled back in, reassured by the quiet victory. Miguel knew the battle was won, but the war was far from over. Ramiro wouldn't forget this, and Miguel had no illusions about the dangers still lurking. For now, though, the market was safe, and that was enough. The evening air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. The market, now closed for the night, stood in quiet contrast to the chaos it had endured earlier. Miguel sat on a bench outside, his eyes scanning the empty street. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day had faded, leaving behind a heavy, contemplative silence. Clara joined him, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. She offered it to him without a word, then sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke, the weight of recent events settling between them. "You didn't have to do this," Clara said finally, her voice soft. "You could have walked away." Miguel shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Walking away doesn't fix anything. People like Ramiro only understand strength, and sometimes you have to remind them that they're not invincible." Clara studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You're not just a cashier, are you?" Miguel sighed, the question lingering in the air like an unspoken truth. "No, I'm not," he admitted. "But I wanted to be. That's why I came here, to leave all of that behind." "All of that?" she echoed, raising an eyebrow. Miguel hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup. "I used to live a different life, one filled with bad choices and worse people. I thought I could escape it by disappearing, by starting over. But the past has a way of catching up." Clara nodded slowly. "Well, whatever you were before, you're different now. You saved this market, Miguel. You saved us." Her words offered some solace, but Miguel couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. Ramiro might have been temporarily subdued, but the man's parting words echoed in his mind. Miguel had made enemies today, enemies who wouldn't forget. As the night deepened, Jose arrived, limping slightly but with a smile on his face. "We did it, didn't we?" he said, sitting heavily on the bench beside them. "Ramiro's tail is between his legs." "For now," Miguel replied, his tone cautious. "But he'll be back. Men like him don't give up easily." Jose shrugged, a grin breaking through. "Then we'll be ready for him. Right, Miguel?" Miguel couldn't help but chuckle at Jose's optimism. Despite his injuries, the man radiated a resilience that was hard to ignore. "We'll see," Miguel said, a hint of a smile on his lips. The three of them sat in companionable silence, the quiet night wrapping around them like a blanket. Miguel's thoughts drifted to the market, the people who had placed their trust in him, and the life he had been trying so hard to build. This wasn't what he had planned, but it was what had happened, and he couldn't turn away now. The next day, the market reopened, bustling with its usual energy. Customers greeted Miguel with smiles and nods, their gratitude evident in their warm exchanges. Word had spread about his role in standing up to Ramiro, and though Miguel appreciated the support, he couldn't help but feel exposed. His anonymity, his quiet existence, was no longer intact. Clara approached him during a lull in the day. "The neighborhood is talking about you," she said, leaning against the counter. "They're calling you a hero." Miguel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I'm no hero, Clara. I just did what had to be done." "Sometimes that's what makes someone a hero," she replied with a small smile. As the day wore on, Miguel found moments of reflection between tasks. He watched Jose interact with customers, his energy undiminished despite his injuries. He saw Clara moving with purpose, her leadership anchoring the market, and he saw the customers, people from all walks of life, filling the aisles with laughter and life. This was why he had stepped in, not for recognition or gratitude, but to protect the fragile sense of community that had become his refuge. For the first time in years, Miguel felt a sense of belonging, a connection to something greater than himself. That night, as Miguel prepared to leave, Clara stopped him by the door. "You're not alone, you know," she said, her gaze steady. "Whatever you're facing, you have us now." Miguel nodded, her words sinking in. For so long, he had carried the weight of his past alone, convinced that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But Clara's unwavering belief in him, Jose's loyalty, and the quiet support of the neighborhood had begun to chip away at his isolation. As he walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, Miguel allowed himself a moment of hope. The victory over Ramiro wasn't just about protecting the market, it was a step toward reclaiming his life, a chance to rewrite his story. But even as the weight lifted, a small voice in the back of his mind reminded him that the peace he had fought for was fragile. Ramiro might have been defeated, but the shadows of Miguel's past were long, and he knew deep down that the battle wasn't over. For now, though, he would hold on to the victory, however fleeting it might be. The market was safe, the people he cared about were secure, and for the first time in years, Miguel allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could build something lasting. The market had settled back into its usual rhythm in the days following the confrontation with Ramiro. Miguel went about his tasks as always, but he couldn't shake the lingering tension. Clara and Jose had resumed their cheerful banter. The customers had returned in full force. And yet, Miguel felt the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. It came on a quiet afternoon. Miguel was restocking canned goods when he noticed a man standing at the entrance of the market. He wasn't from the neighborhood, that much was clear. His tailored jacket, polished shoes, and cold, assessing gaze marked him as an outsider. He stood out like a blade in a sheath of soft fabrics. Miguel's stomach dropped as recognition set in. The man's name was Victor, and he was no ordinary visitor. He was a ghost from Miguel's past, one he had prayed would never find him. Victor didn't approach immediately. Instead, he wandered the aisles with a deliberate air, occasionally picking up an item before putting it back. Miguel tried to focus on his work, but his hands trembled as memories clawed their way to the surface. Memories of a life filled with danger, violence, and betrayal. Eventually, Victor stopped by the counter where Miguel was standing. He placed a single can of soup down and smiled, though the gesture didn't reach his eyes. "Long time, Miguel," Victor said, his voice low and smooth. "Or should I call you by your other name?" Miguel stiffened but kept his expression neutral. "You've got the wrong person." Victor chuckled softly. "I don't think so. You've done a good job disappearing, I'll give you that. But some of us never stop looking." Miguel scanned the can, the beep of the register sounding unnaturally loud. "What do you want?" Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "Just a conversation, somewhere private. I think we have unfinished business." Clara appeared nearby, her sharp eyes picking up on the tension. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. Miguel forced a smile. "Yes, Clara, just an old acquaintance." Victor nodded, his smile thin. "I'll wait outside." Miguel watched as Victor left, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. Clara stepped closer, concern etched across her face. "Who is that, Miguel?" "No one important," he said quickly, though his voice betrayed him. Clara frowned but didn't push. "Be careful." Miguel nodded, taking a deep breath before heading outside. Victor was leaning against a sleek black car, the picture of calm menace. As Miguel approached, Victor gestured toward the passenger side. "Get in," he said. "We need to talk." Miguel hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to walk away. But he knew Victor wouldn't leave without answers, and ignoring him could put Clara and the market in danger. Reluctantly, he opened the door and slid into the car. The silence inside was suffocating as Victor started the engine and drove a short distance away, parking in an isolated alley. He turned off the engine and faced Miguel, his expression devoid of the false warmth he had shown earlier. "You've been hiding for a long time," Victor said, "but you knew it couldn't last forever." Miguel met his gaze, his voice steady. "I'm not that person anymore." "Maybe not," Victor conceded. "But the things you did, the people you crossed, they haven't forgotten, and they want answers. They want justice." Miguel's jaw tightened. "If they wanted me dead, you wouldn't be talking to me right now." Victor smirked. "True. They don't just want you dead. They want to make an example of you. But I'm here because I think you're smarter than that. You can make this easier for yourself." "And what do you want, Victor?" Miguel asked, his tone sharp. "I want you to come with me," Victor said simply. "Face the people you betrayed. Maybe they'll show mercy if you cooperate." Miguel laughed bitterly. "Mercy? From them? You and I both know that's not how this works." Victor shrugged. "It's your choice, but if you don't come willingly, they'll send others. And next time, they won't ask nicely." Miguel's mind raced, calculating his options. He had spent years building a new life, trying to bury the mistakes of his past. But now that past was staring him in the face, demanding a reckoning. "You tell them this," Miguel said, his voice low and deliberate. "I'm not running anymore. If they want me, they know where to find me." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Miguel's defiance. Brave words. Let's see how long they hold up. He reached for the door handle but paused, his expression hardening. "I'll give you one piece of advice, Miguel. Protect what you care about. They'll go after it first." Miguel's stomach twisted as Victor exited the car, leaving him alone in the suffocating silence. He sat there for a moment, the weight of the encounter settling over him like a shroud. He had known this day might come, but knowing didn't make it any easier. When he returned to the market, Clara was waiting for him, her arms crossed. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to guess?" Miguel hesitated, then nodded. "I'll tell you everything, but not here." The two of them walked toward the back office, the market's warm lights casting long shadows. Miguel knew he couldn't hide anymore. The past he had fought so hard to escape was here, demanding answers. And this time, he wasn't sure he could outrun it. The story of Miguel reminds us that no matter how far we run, our past has a way of catching up to us. It challenges us to think about the choices we make and the courage it takes to face our fears head-on. If you were in Miguel's shoes, would you fight to protect what you've built? Or would you walk away to preserve the fragile peace? Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. Click on the video on your screen to continue this journey of self-discovery and uncover more stories that inspire reflection and courage. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that challenges you to think deeper and act braver. See you in the next one.